My father-in-law was a man of exquisite taste. He had a gorgeous desk that he actually used to work from. It had a leather top, inlaid wood, detailed carving that was just, well, it was stunning. But as they rearranged their house, they realized they just didn't have room for the desk anymore. So he decided to sell it. One of the neighbors wanted that desk. They reached an agreement. The neighbor came over with cash, handed it to my father-in-law, who realized it wasn't the amount they agreed on. So he pointed this out. The neighbor said, well, that's what I have right now. I hope that'll be okay. My father-in-law said, well, no, that's not okay. This is not what we agreed upon. The neighbor took his cash and left in a huff. He came back a little bit later with the correct amount of cash, picked up the desk, but then threw the cash at my father-in-law's feet. Well, I might have reacted a little differently, but my father-in-law was a patient and courteous man and just realized that neighbor, that was sort of his personality. So how does this apply to you in your real estate transaction? Well, let me show you how something like this does apply. As a matter of fact, more often than you would think. And let's talk about how to avoid it. Hi, Stuart Sutton at Agent Finder, where we use a combination of AI and human expertise, common sense, to find the very best agent for your specific home. I'm going to talk about a source of major frustration for real estate agents, buyers, and sellers, and talk about how you can avoid that. When a buyer brings an offer, the seller has three options: accept, counter, or reject. Now, I don't recommend rejecting because I have brought some incredibly low, disturbing offers up to agreements that went to closing. So that's up to you, but it does happen. The seller counters as one of their options, giving the buyer the same three options. They can accept, counter, or reject the seller's counter offer. So why did the agent call me in total frustration? Ready to pull their hair out, just not sure what to do. Because this situation had happened, and actually they were in the midst of it. Well, their buyer had made an offer to the seller, who had then reacted by countering, and then the buyer accepted. Done, right? Well, no, not quite. Because what happened was the buyer made an offer, the seller countered it verbally, and when I say the seller, I mean the listing agent representing the seller countered it verbally. She did put it in an email, but that's the same as verbal. I'll explain why in a minute. The buyer accepted that verbal offer verbally. Done? No. What happened next was that the buyer agent asked the listing agent, follow me here, to put the counter in writing and send it over so her buyers could initial the changes, and they would be under contract. The listing agent sent the counter. When the buyer agent received it, it was different. There were more changes. When the buyer agent inquired, the listing agent just said, oh, well, the seller thought about it and they wanted some more changes. Well, that's not what was agreed on. So basically that invalidated the counter. It's actually a different counter. It invalidated the acceptance. In the thought that they had an agreement was negated. There was no agreement. So now the buyer has to think about, well, can we even trust this seller? We reach an agreement and they make more changes? Or are these changes something we want to consider? I mean, we liked the other counter. What do we do about this one? So it throws them into turmoil. Let's try to keep those buyers out of turmoil. Or if it goes the other way with the seller, because it can happen where the seller counters in writing and the buyer counters verbally. So it could go either way. But in this situation, the buyer was absolutely in emotional turmoil. They didn't know what to do. And that's why the agent was so frustrated. Think about this. A verbal contract means nothing. Zero, zilch. Even an email with terms means nothing. Now you're saying, well, wait a minute, Stuart. I've heard that in some states, text or email negotiations are acceptable. Well, yeah, but that is very precise. And to follow the very precise pattern that has to be held up in court is usually not done. So the answer is simply this: insist that any counter, any changes be put in writing on the real estate contract. So if that initial counter had not been verbal, but put in writing and initialed by the seller, when it got to the buyer, they could have initialed it and been done. But instead, they received a second counter that was different than the first counter. Emotional turmoil. So how do you get a listing agent or a seller to respond in writing? Well, the listing agent might say, well, this is faster. Let's just do this. We'll go back and forth and we'll put it all together. That does save time, but it's a shortcut. And it's a shortcut that should not be a habit. Have I done it before? Has every agent done it before? In certain situations where it's nearly impossible to get it in writing, sure. But when it's available to be put in writing, it should be put in writing. And that should be your standard. Now, if you get more pushback, just simply say, look, we sent you an offer in writing. If I'd have sent it to you in email form with the terms listed, what would you have thought? You wouldn't have taken it seriously. My buyers are more likely to take this seriously if it's actually in writing and initialed. If you wouldn't mind doing that, we would really appreciate it. So you're protecting your client by getting it in writing from getting into a situation like this agent had gotten into. So get it in writing, make sure that it's done properly, that you're meeting the standards that you know you should meet. Whether you're a buyer, a seller, or an agent, let's just say you're a seller and your agent wants to do it verbally. You might ask, would you mind going ahead and doing it this way? And that way, you know that it's going to be done right. If you're a seller who says, well, verbal's okay with me because then I can change my mind if I want to. Well, that's true, you can. But if you put it in writing and initial it and send it over, it's official. If you don't, and then you make some changes, you're going to lose trust. And trust is the biggest thing that keeps a real estate transaction on track to closing. So don't lose trust by handling it another way. Keep it in writing. I hope that makes sense. I'll put another video up here for you. This one is going to point out some things that, well, you're absolutely positively going to want to pay attention to. Matter of fact, in this video, there are things that can cost you a sale easily that are easily avoidable. Hope you enjoyed this video. Subscribe if you like what you're seeing. And remember, it's your choice, so make it a powerful day. See you on the next video.